The sales tax code is a central part of the setup. It specifies how taxes are calculated and the value that will be used for the tax calculation. There are many options available when you're setting up a sales tax code. Let's review some of those. First, we'll talk about origins. There are several options that you can select in the Origins drop-down box. The percentage of net amount. This is used for a percentage of the purchase or sale, excluding any other taxes. Percentage of gross amount. The percentage of the purchase or sale, including any other taxes, is used for this particular calculation. Sales tax calculates as a percentage of the purchase or sale amount, and this will include any other taxes or duties that are added to that particular order. Next, you can select percentage of sales tax. This is a percentage of another tax. The tax code that is used as the calculation is based on must exist in the system. On the Calculation tab, you set up the specific sales tax code that you want to base the current sales tax code on in the Sales on Tax field. Next, you can select the Amount per Unit option. This indicates the unit on which the sales tax will be calculated. You specify that unit in the Unit field. If the transaction is in another unit, it converts automatically based on the unit conversion that is configured in the inventory. The last option is a calculated percentage. This uses a calculated percentage of the net amount. The calculated percentage of the net amount calculation method can be used to calculate input tax deduction for per diem expenses. This, for example, is used in Germany. Next is the marginal base. The marginal base field indicates which portion of the tax transaction the sales tax will be applied to. The calculation works in combination with the calculation method field to determine the rate to be applied. In the United States, sales tax is usually calculated for each invoice line, and the total sales tax on the invoice is the sum of sales taxes of each line. In Europe, it is common to total the base amount for all invoice lines. The calculated base is then used to calculate the taxes. Last is the calculation method. You can select whole amount or interval. Whole amount indicates the tax rate is applied to the whole taxable amount. Interval indicates that the taxable amount is divided into parts, each of which falls into a range that has a specific sales tax rate. The part of the amount that falls in a given interval is taxed according to the tax rate for that interval. The sales tax is then the sum of tax amounts that are calculated for each interval. For taxes to be calculated on all taxable amounts, regardless of which calculation method is selected, intervals must follow these following rules. The first interval must have a lower limit of 0. The last interval must have an upper limit of 0, which indicates infinity. The upper limit of an interval must be lower than the limit of the next interval. If an amount is the upper limit or the previous interval and the lower limit of the next interval, the sales tax rate of the first interval will be applied to the amount. If an amount falls outside the intervals that are defined by the upper and lower limits, a sales tax rate of 0 will be applied. In this demonstration, I'll show you how to set up a sales tax code. These are created from General Ledger, underneath Setup, Sales Tax Codes, and then Sales Tax Codes. Here you can see the full list of all the sales tax codes that exist in the system. I'll go ahead and create a new one. For my example, I'll name it WY for Wyoming. If required, you can optionally select the sales tax jurisdiction code. We haven't created these yet, so I'll leave this blank. Next, you'll want to select the currency that this sales tax code will be calculated in. Because Wyoming is in the U.S., I'll select U.S. dollars. If you're using conditional sales taxes, you'll want to select the payment sales tax code. For this example, we're going to skip that. Next is the settlement period. I'll select the Wyoming settlement period that we created earlier, which indicates that these sales tax payments need to be made quarterly. Then I'll select the ledger posting group that we created earlier, called sample, which indicates which GL accounts these need to be posted to. You can also specify a sort code for the packing duties and indicate whether or not you want the sales tax information to be printed on the invoices. You can select to print the code or the sales tax rate. If you choose to print the code, you'll want to type the code into the print code field. Next, you can optionally select whether the negative sales tax percentage should be allowed. On the Calculation tab, you'll want to select the options. For this particular example, we'll select percentage of net amount, but here you can see the other options that are available. We discussed these in our last lesson. Then, in the marginal base, you'll want to select the option. For my example, we're going to use net amount of invoice balance. Here in the drop-down box, you can see the other options that we discussed. The last one is the whole amount, or the interval in the calculation method. You can also specify the rounding information specific to this sales tax code. On the Report Setup tab, you can select all the information to determine how the reporting should print for this particular sales tax code. Then, on the Report Setup credit node, you can select all the options that will be specific to credit notes that are being posted for this particular sales tax code. Next, we'll need to set up the rate for this particular sales tax code. This is done by clicking the Values button. Here, you can enter the date ranges, a minimum and upper limit. In many cases, minimum and upper limits do not apply. For my example, I'm just going to enter a simple rate of 7.25%. And then I'll close the window. If you refresh the window, you'll notice now that the percentage amount field has been populated. When you're finished, if required, you can also set up limits. Limits are only used when you're using the calculation method of interval. You can also use the Inquiries button to drill down into details such as which items are included in the sales tax group and which sales tax groups are included. You can also inquire into the posted sales tax for this particular sales tax group. The Print button allows you to print the details of the sales tax codes or the sales tax reporting codes. When you're finished, click Close.